And the pandemic is causing more pain in the job market. According to the Labor Department, close to 900,000 Americans filed for unemployment benefits just last week. That's worse than expected. And while many jobs are being cut right now, a new program in San Antonio is helping prepare people get back to work.
Now, one of the first steps in getting the Ready to Work program off the ground is going to be building an advisory board. Erica Zucco joins us now with more on really why, Erica, the group is so important to those folks who've been struggling.
Yeah, Barry and Vanessa, well, these people are going to have input into how the program is run and how the money spent on it is spent. So it's really important that they have a diverse group of community members, including employers, potentially labor representatives, potentially people who are actually part of that program. And the process to put together that panel is happening right now. Voters approved the new Ready to Work program in November, redirecting sales tax funding toward career training and education. The city has already worked with local businesses and nonprofits to get some training programs set up with pipelines into available jobs in high-demand industries. The goal here is to create a board with, as I mentioned, employers, participants in the program, community organizations. They'll be appointed, though, which means it'll be up to council members and the mayor to listen and choose people with a diverse range of perspectives. If you have feedback or ideas, you can contact your council member. With the best case scenario, the program will train around 40,000 workers impacted by the pandemic and related factors over 4 years. They'll start recruitment for the board right now. They're hoping to have it in place in January and potentially for that board to have policies and principles laid out by March. Reporting downtown, Erica Zucco, KENS 5 Eyewitness News.